Whenever you're ready. Who's going first? All right, Christina.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So my presentation is on gender identity. So what is bias? Bias is prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. So unbiased forms of media. What sources of information could you reasonably expect to be fact-based and why? So some sources of information that I feel would be fact-based are those coming from a place of genuine research, coming from science and math that are unable to be tampered with, such as lab reports, scientific reports or discoveries, data analysis, labs, the Criminal Code of Justice, and Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Biased forms of media. What sources of information might you find to be biased and how so? Media bias is a bias of perceived bias of journalists and news producers within the mass media in the selection of many events and stories that are reported and how they are covered. So, including blogs, interviews, and news outlets. So what is gender identity? Gender identity is a person's perception of having a particular gender which may or may not correspond with their birth sex. Gender expression typically reflects a person's gender identity, but this is not always the case. While a person may express behaviors, attitudes, and appearances known to a particular gender role, such as an expression, may not necessarily reflect their gender identity. All societies have a set of gender categories that can serve as the basis of a person's self-identity in relation to other members of society. In most societies, there is a basic division between gender attributes assigned to males and females, a gender binary to which most people adhere, and which includes expectations of masculinity and femininity in all aspects of sex and gender, biological sex, gender identity, and gender expression. Some people do not identify with some or all of the aspects of gender assigned to their biological sex. Some of those people are transgender, non-binary, or genderqueer. Some societies have third gender categories as well. Gender identity is usually formed by age 3. After age 3, it is very difficult to change and attempt to reassign. It can also result in gender dysphoria. Both biological and social factors have been suggested to influence its formation. On June 19th, 2017, 5 years after gender identity and gender expression were added as protected grounds of discrimination in Ontario's Human Rights Code, the federal government has added gender identity and gender expression to the Canadian Human Rights Act. All Canadian provinces now have gender identity and/or gender expression expressly included in their human rights legislation. Yet many employers are still unclear as to what they need to do to respect the human rights of their transgendered or gender non-conforming employees. So should gender identity be added to anti-discrimination laws? An ongoing Canadian poll shows the following votes. So 61% of Canadians said yes, 4% of Canadians said yes, and the government should do more to protect minorities from discrimination. 29% of Canadians said no, and 4% said no, there are only two genders which are genetically not psychologically determined. The National Transgender Discrimination Survey showed that 26% of trans people lost a job due to bias, 50% were harassed on the job, 20% were evicted or denied housing, and 78% of trans students were harassed or assaulted. And the transphobia that drives the discrimination is exacerbated when the trans person is a person of color and also faces compounding racism, meaning trans people of color face even higher rates of discrimination. Clear non-discrimination laws covering gender identity and expression are an important part of the solution because they can help stop the discrimination before it happens. Clear laws often cause businesses to have policies against discrimination and train employees to follow those policies. At this point, much protection can also be found under state and federal sex discrimination laws as well. So, why is transgender equality important, especially in a public setting like the workplace? Is my question posed to the class.
It allows for fair opportunities and it assures justice for everyone in a safe public manner.
Great answer, Sadaleo. Anyone else?
If it's not equal and it's like becomes a hostile work environment, then productivity as a whole goes down.
True.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I think a lot of companies that keep up with the times, if you will, and add policies and change policies when needed. Often the reason a company exists is to make money, right?
Mhm.
And so and when you talk about bias in the public eye, they might say, okay, we're changing this policy to protect transgendered people for this, if we talk about this one in particular. But one of the other reasons in terms of what people often might present is that, well, it might hurt, their dollar intake if the public sees them as being going against what the popular notions of the time are, right?
Mhm.
So, that's a big thing. And either way, it's a good thing for them to change their policies, because it helps, people who need protection, right? Not everybody needs protection, especially in in the world of identity in general.
Mhm.
So yeah. Did you find any news articles written about anything, or?
I read a few pretty much having the same kinds of cases where, like I already said, just being denied of jobs and just not being treated equally. And yeah.
Yeah, interesting, because it's a pretty big debate. I mean,
Mhm.
when we talk about the history of civil rights, women, people of color, trans rights, LGBTQ plus community, it's all civil rights, right?
Yeah.
And one factor is the way that the public views, um, other people, the other, and another factor is how the government views it, the situation, and then of course how private entities and companies view it. And often when you have, the public swaying to think one way, slowly but surely behind them, the government does, and so do private, companies. And those companies left. I mean, a couple years ago, Chick-fil-A or whatever that company in the States,
Chick-fil-A.
whatever, it was all over the news because, they were denying anything to do with rights for LGBTQ plus individuals, right? But it created this whole, dichotomy and bias in the news, especially because, in one hand, the lineups, they got so much press, and the lineups for these stores were, the chicken stores were so big. But on the other hand, people were boycotting them, saying, they are run by anti-LGBTQ, groups and so forth. And when the one in Toronto opened, the lineup was down the street. And many of those people were there to find out, what's the big deal, or, this and that. But the owners were very much, against that, allowing rights for anybody who wasn't, of the male or female identity. And we still see this often. I mean, in the States, we see a lot of people in the cake world saying, I won't make cakes for, anybody. Anyway, give me 1 second.
Should I unshare my?
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyone else have anything to say about that? I mean, it's a very big issue. Unfortunately, with COVID, a lot of issues like this have either become secondary, or even with Trump being, or not just the Trump, but the U.S. election and how Trump has dealt with COVID and everything. Certain, fundamental human rights issues that have been in the mainstream media have become less important on the front page, if you will. Not less important, but less on the front page. That's what I mean. In the news media. But that being said, I think, the same thing happens every time we have steps forward with human rights. We have, people voicing their opinions. We have protests. We have, and the general public starts to sway their opinion or what have you. And then ideally we get more and more rights given to people. I mean, that's the way it should be working, right? More and more rights. If one group identifies as something and they get rights, why shouldn't anybody else get rights, right? Yeah, I don't know. Anyone else? Cool. All right. Thank you for sharing. Who's next?
Me, I guess.
You, I guess. Who's you? Ryan?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Okay. Do I present my entire screen or a window or a Chrome tab?
However you want to do it. I usually do it with a Chrome tab, and I can do a specific thing, but they're all in Chrome, so it's up to you.
All right, let's see how this works. Share. Is it visible?
Not yet.
No?
Yeah. Not yet.
Sorry, I don't know how to do this.
So go to the bottom right. It says present now. And you should be given an option. I mean, what are you presenting? Is it in Chrome?
Yeah, it's a slideshow.
So go to Chrome tab. And
it's
then,
not letting me. Now the button's been blanked out. It won't let me click on it.
Which button? The
present now.
You could just present your screen and go to the tab.
That's right. Just press present screen.
Just make sure there's like nothing you don't want anyone seeing
Yeah,
on
exactly.
the screen. And press the screen and then just go and look at your own slideshow and we'll be able to see it. Oh, he left. Never mind.
Oh, no, that's my other one because I'm trying to present from my laptop.
Well, yeah, then just sign in on your laptop and press present screen and then just hop onto the slides.
Entire screen.
Yeah.
It won't let me share.
Maybe you could share it with me and I'll present it.
Okay, you do that, yeah.
Or wait, let me just try it from my phone instead.
That too.
Start
What
sharing.
kind of computer are you on right now?
HP laptop.
You're using Chrome? Oh, there you go.
It's working.
You see my phone?
I see your phone, yeah.
Oh, cool. Hey, it worked.
Be careful.
Slides.
Westworld fan? Nice.
Yes, very big Westworld fan. Best show I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yes. Did you like the new season, sir?
Yeah, the latest season was phenomenal. I liked
Yes, I liked it. No thanks. Alrighty. Wexit. Now, Wexit is a movement based on the idea of the Western provinces, including Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia, separating from Canada. hence the phrase Western exit shortened to Wexit. Now, the majority of these sentiments come from Alberta specifically, which is nothing new given the fact that separation movements have existed since the 1930s, with the formation of the Social Credit Party in Alberta, their symbol being in the middle there, and then again in the 1980s, which was during Pierre Elliott Trudeau's time as Prime Minister, which is part of the reason Albertans dislike the current Prime Minister Justin Trudeau so much. Now, this iteration of the movement was co-founded in 2019 by former RCMP officer Peter Downing. His image is there on the right, and he isn't actually the current leader. Now, the movement gained traction in October 2019 following the federal election, and it became an official party in January 2020. They registered parties at both the federal and provincial level, with the federal party being the Maverick Party, changed from Wexit Canada, a point I will touch upon again later, and the provincial parties being the Wildrose Independence Party of Alberta, Wexit British Columbia, and Buffalo Party of Saskatchewan, with their respective symbols being there. Now, the parties are considered right-wing and populist. The biggest issue that pushed people to form Wexit was recent tensions regarding the oil sector. Oil has been a major point of contention for separatists for decades because they feel that the federal government does not do enough for the industry. On this occasion, issues arose after the federal government purchased the Trans Mountain Pipeline, only to have British Columbia and various indigenous groups block the construction, putting the entire project on hold. British Columbia's provincial government did not allow any construction to be built on their land, and many protests and blockades went up. And while the federal government did disperse these blockades and arrest protesters and activists, Albertans and separatists still felt this wasn't enough. But the oil industry is only part of Wexiteers' problems with the country. Other reasons people have joined Wexit is this feeling of Western alienation, in that their problems, needs, and desires are being ignored by the federal government and East Canada as a whole, as well as taxation at the hands of the federal government, which they feel is too high. So the plan would be that by separating, Western Canada can put a bigger emphasis on their oil industry while having lower taxes and ensuring their issues are at the forefront of the country, well, their country. They would also establish their own national defense and currency. Now, Wexit's been in the news a lot lately, like these past couple months, starting in June 2020 when they named former Conservative MP from British Columbia and former House Leader under Prime Minister Stephen Harper, Jay Hill, as the interim leader of the party, until they choose a new leader. Photo down there on the left. Now, Hill had retired from politics back in 2010, but felt the need to return because, in his own words, the West will never be treated fairly because of the Golden Triangle of Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa, reiterating this idea of Western alienation. Now, since he took up the position, Hill announced that he has no plans for the so far 104 candidates that Wexit has to run in the next federal election. Instead, he wants to focus on building the ground up so that it can become a more credible and serious group before going on to convince all four Western provinces to secede together. Another decision he made was to change the name of the Wexit Party, something I mentioned earlier, with it now being the Maverick Party, something they changed back in September. Now, Hill had felt that the Wexit brand had been tainted, and he also wanted to appeal to a broader audience than simply those who want to leave Canada. So, after holding a Facebook poll on the Wexit Facebook page, 2/3 of voters said they'd be open to a name change, and subsequently, Hill decided to go ahead and begin an internal review process in which he and other officials in Wexit decided to change the name to Maverick. Maverick meaning a person who thinks differently and independently of the status quo, embodying that concept of like Wexiteers who think independently from the rest of Canada. Now, they also pointed out that Maverick is just a broader term. This has been met with mixed reactions, with supporters liking that it's more generalized, but critics have pointed out that it's kind of lost its name power, as Wexit kind of sent a message that we want to leave Canada, whereas Maverick doesn't really do that as much. And some people have also poked fun at the fact that Maverick is a name popularized by the film Top Gun, and as such, there's been a lot of memes and jokes about it. Although personally, I haven't watched the movie, so I don't really understand them. But I get the gist. Now, at the end of August, co-founder Peter Downing began pushing the concept of Alberta seceding to the U.S. Downing formed a new organization, the Alberta USA Foundation, that began putting up billboards, a tactic he's used multiple times in the past, asking if Alberta should secede to the U.S. So two of them are there, the one in the middle and the one on the right. Now, supporters state that the U.S. could provide Alberta with, quote-unquote, all the freedom, job prospects, and investment capital that Albertans would want, and Alberta would be appealing to the U.S., given the fact that the province has large oil reserves and its geopolitical location close to the Arctic would bring the country closer to having a foothold there. Critics, on the other hand, have pointed out that there's a long process to becoming a state, if they become a state at all, given the fact that territories like Guam and Puerto Rico are yet to become states, while others have pointed out that while the oil industry is very strong in the south, like states like Texas, up north, oil doesn't have as much appeal, a point accentuated by the fact that just recently the Supreme Court upheld a block on the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline that was being built from Wisconsin to Montana. So people have said that it's unlikely that Alberta would be allowed to make similar pipelines on their land as well. Now, given the fact that there's so much news circulating, there's been a lot of coverage. And for the most part, it's been quite factual. Outlets like the CBC and CTV have provided objective coverage of the Wexit movement. For instance, CBC's Joel Dryden wrote an article in which he made use of statistics to demonstrate people's views on the issues and who stands where, with the specific stats coming from Abascus data, in which it asks how Albertans feel about Alberta separating. Now, it only asked 1,500 people, but they were all asked from different parts of Alberta to better capture what people think there. In addition to this, he quotes multiple experts throughout his article to help provide a more informed view as well, specifically asking the CEO of Abascus Data, David Coletto, on his views of the Wexit movement and how much credibility there is to it. Like, part of the quote is down there, if anyone can read it. Dryden also avoids including any predictions or opinions of his own, making sure that they can't be mistaken for facts, something more biased journalists like to use often. So he avoided this by just eliminating them altogether. On the other hand, while there have been articles demonstrating bias for and against Wexit, it's been rather limited, which I'd say is a good thing. An example of bias in support of Wexit would be the Gateway Gazette's article entitled "Wexit Goes Thermonuclear, Alberta's Separation Imminent." So throughout the article, multiple claims are made without actually backing them up with evidence, whether it be statistics, expert opinions, or just general thoughts by everyday Canadians. So at the bottom there's some points from the article, and while they do make a reference in their first point to electoral results of the Reform Party and other separatist party from the 80s and 90s, so they use the electoral results from this party as proof that Wexit will ensure that the Conservative Party will never again form a majority. But they don't actually provide those numbers or a link to those numbers, so there's no way to know from this article whether or not that's true. They're just kind of referencing them. Another claim they make in their point D is that Jason Kenney will call a referendum on Albertan separation in order to quote-unquote maintain his political relevance, even though Kenney has stated multiple times that he's vehemently against separation in regards to Wexit, and has said about Wexit and his social media presence that, quote-unquote, it doesn't look like a thoughtful conversation to me, Jason Kenney. Likewise, critics of Wexit haven't been fully objective at times either, such as Wexit and Climate Pollution, A Tale of Two Canadas, written by Canada's National Observer's writer Barry Saxifrage. Now, in this case, the article does use statistics and graphs, but the manner in which they are used demonstrates a clear bias and objective. Saxifrage repeatedly refers to the tons of carbon dioxide per person of Alberta and Saskatchewan in comparison to Canada, the US, China, and other major oil producers, using this as evidence that Wexit and Alberta's general plan of oil reliance will be harmful and should not proceed. But the issue is that tons of carbon dioxide per person can be rather misleading in this case, because while Alberta and Saskatchewan do produce a lot of oil, they have significantly smaller populations than countries like China and the US, making it a rather unfair comparison. Because Alberta and Saskatchewan combined have approximately 5.5 million people, compared to China's 1.393 billion and 328 million in America. So it makes sense that their TCO2 would be higher per person because there are less people in general. Thank you for listening. Anyone have any thoughts?
Yeah, good. I don't know if you saw the notes I posted today. We're going to talk about nationalism and sovereignty and a little bit of Wexit and things like that. And we'll know, it came to a big deal, especially this past election, etc. Canada has a long history of this type of mentality. I'll let anyone else say anything before I talk.
Should I stop sharing my screen?
Yeah, stop sharing your screen if you want. Cool. Interesting, even though this type of mentality, especially in the West, outside of the Quebec thing, because everyone talks about the Quebec thing, has been going on for a very long time. And the oil situation is an interesting one because, as we push to use more renewable energy and things like that, Alberta has historically been one of the richer types of provinces due to oil, and not just richer, but employment. I mean, many people would flock if they couldn't find jobs across Canada to Alberta and the oil sands to get work and be paid, quite handsomely. In Fort McMurray, there's is one of the main towns situated around the oil sands. Large population of people not from there working, but also, one of the highest, crime rates in terms of violence that we see in all of Canada, due to, different factors, type of person who goes there to work, etc. But that being said, put aside, the idea that the economy is very much based on oil, and with the push on greener initiatives, especially in the last decade or so, but Alberta relying on the oil, it's created quite a dichotomy, and it's also reminiscent of the industry in Newfoundland that was relying on fisheries for a very, very long time. And many people were fishermen or their family members relied on the fisheries. Then all the fish were basically fished out by Canadians and the Spanish, and then they basically stopped the fishing industry, and the whole province became quite poor. Similar with Alberta, is what they don't want to happen is so much of the industry is able to sustain itself through oil, yet we're pushing for renewable, energy, and the funding, etc. So it's definitely become, an interesting kind of situation. Reminds me of when Trump was campaigning around North America. A lot of towns in America were built around coal mines, and coal is being used less and less, and these towns would be, shut down. The coal mine shut down. The whole town loses basically its whole life. And he would go around to these towns and say, "I'm going to open up the coal mines again. You're going to get your jobs back." And they believed him. Did they open the coal mines? Well, not really, but my father was a coal miner. His father was a coal miner. My grandfather was a coal miner. That mentality where I'm going to be a coal miner is, a lot of people argue that doesn't make any sense. I mean, we have to look forward, not backwards. And similar mentality with oil, right? Is that, this is what the whole province has been built on. We can't change. Is it that they can't change or don't want to change or what have you is the big debate, right?
Well, people have pointed out that Alberta have a pretty big agricultural industry as well, but it was only like once they found more oil that they really became oil centric.
Sure. And lots of dinosaurs there, right, too? That's where the oil comes from, right? But interesting, yeah. I mean, we'll have to see how it plays out, because if, and there's also, going back to the lobbyist idea, where the lobbyists in the oil industry are very powerful. And a couple of years ago with the pipeline, there was a lot of backlash against it, but it still happened because of the lobbyists basically being able to, get their influence. Yeah, I don't know.
I wouldn't think it's too much of a cause for concern, because when I was looking at the separation movement during the 80s, it was again during a liberal majority, but then once the conservatives came in with Brian Mulroney, it essentially just died out.
Well, I'm sure, yeah, I mean, there's, when people push for this type of, discourse to go into the news, it becomes more popularized. It's not that it just appeared out of nowhere, but it gets more popularized through, media, etc. Yeah, I don't know. Oops. So we'll talk more about it as we go through those notes. So who's next? One more,
It's me.
right?
It's me.
All right, go for it.
Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay. So my presentation is about the United States federal election. So how does it work? The Republican and Democratic Party each vote in a representative form, from each party to unite behind and one that they are confident that he or she can win the election and has what it takes to be the leader of the free world. The winner of the federal election depends on the addition of which party wins the most electors after being added up between all 50 states. So it is not who has the most votes in total from the whole country, but who has the most electoral votes. The number of electors come from each state, which is roughly in line with the size of its population. There are 538 electors in total. For example, if the Republican candidate won 50.1% of the vote in Texas, they would be awarded all of the state's 38 electoral college votes. This is why presidential candidates target specific swing states, these are states where the vote could go either way, rather than trying to win over as many voters as possible across the country. Every state they win gets them closer to 270 electoral votes they need to beat their opponent with. Each elector represents one electoral vote, and a candidate needs to gain a majority of the votes, so 270 or more to win the whole thing. So who can vote? You can vote in U.S. elections if you are an American citizen, are 18 years of age or older, and have already registered to vote by the state's voter registration deadline. You cannot vote if you're not a legal American citizen and have not registered to vote yet. And some states won't allow you to vote if the person has a felony conviction. Lots of discussion and review have happened on if they should be able to vote or not. Republican-led states usually tend to not let felons vote compared to Democratic states, but rules vary by state. All 50 states require voter registration except North Dakota. The main reason that people register to vote is to make sure they vote one time only in each election. Otherwise, people who use multiple addresses could scamper from one location to another on election day and vote at each one. So how to decide who to vote for? There are 4 presidential debates before election day, on November 3rd this year, actually. Three of the 4 presidential debates will be between the elected nominees from the both Republican and Democratic Party. One of the debates is between the vice presidential nominees. And in the current situation, there will be 3 debates between Joe Biden and President Trump, and a single debate between current Vice President Pence and Democratic Vice President nominee Kamala Harris. In these debates, It is controlled by a moderator who is usually a journalist and or a television news reporter. Topics and issues about the country are discussed during the debates and how to help fix them. So the current situation. Many American voters are very concerned on the country's future because they do not really have faith in the candidates from either parties, especially when going through a global pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement. Americans seem to be very divided on what their views are for the current future for the country, as do the leaders of both the Democratic and Republican Party. Over 25% of Americans in 2020 are not pleased with who they will vote for. They would just like to not have the other candidate be their president. The country seems to be more divided now than ever. So the main differences between American elections compared to like Canadian elections are federal electoral form and the presidency itself and the electoral college. So facts versus bias. Some news outlets stay neutral by giving out just information about what has actually happened, while some give out biased information to try to lean voters on either the left or the right side of the political spectrum. This is done by giving fake news or twisting the words of important political figures with the intent to try to make the other party look bad. News sources like CNN, the Huffington Post, and the New York Times are considered to be more democratic and left-leaning, while Fox News leans more to the right in their beliefs. And a discussion question for you guys is, do you guys believe the news when you hear it, or do you think it is all biased?
I think it's really biased.
Why?
Because news outlets always have a political agenda, unless you're like even the very, very neutral ones do, because it's people reporting issues and every person has their own individual opinion that whether they like it or not will always seep into what they're speaking about.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I mean, like sometimes I believe it. Like if they said, "Oh, this people they looted this, I don't know, shop," I believe it. But they're probably not saying the whole story. Like there might be something more to it.
Yeah.
I feel like I've read some things that like investigative journalism is like really diminishing these days. Like if you look at the news, they say, "Oh, this person claimed this and that person claimed this." They don't actually tell you like, you know, what they found out to be true.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks for listening to my presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, just like can't remember whose presentation gave us the graphic with the which news outlets are on the left, right, middle, that kind of thing. You know, traditionally in the news outlets, you know, newspapers originally and television, radio now, have always leaned or one way or another, and the reasons for that are many. I mean, the ideologies of the people who created that news outlet, and of course where the money comes from or where they allow the money to come from, etc. So, you know, especially in election times, I mean, it seems it's always an election time. They're going to try to sway the popular, you know, the people who read their news articles or watch the television to vote one way or another. You know, many people were wondering why was there a Fox News correspondent who was the moderator for the you know, the debate the other day. You know, when Fox is traditionally, you know, leans and follows Trump, right? And then their backlash was, well, the moderator is, though he's a Fox News correspondent, he's very much the most left-leaning Fox News correspondent, etc. So, you know, this is the point on why we have to take classes like this, is to understand and to see through, well, number one, that there is bias in news, and number two, to understand and think critically about what information you're given. That being said, going back to the specific topic about the system in which the Americans have, you know, and the system which Canada has too, is neither of them uses the popular vote. And, the biggest, ideas are that they're not fair. I mean, if we had electoral reform in Canada before the last election, Trudeau would not have won the election because the popular vote was actually in favor of the Conservative Party. And in the United States, it's actually even worse with the swing state and the electoral seats and things like that. But excuse me, the system, it's hard to change the system. Trudeau, one of the things he said in the first election campaign was that he was going to, perform the change into the system. But one of the first things he said when he was elected was that he's not going to do that. Maybe he had foresight to know that he wouldn't be reelected. Who knows? But it's interesting to watch everything that's happening now in the United States. I mean, there's so many factors involved with the COVID, the BLM movement, the Antifa, the alt-left, alt-right, this kind of stuff. It's creating a huge divide. And, many people are voicing their opinions because they can, because of social media like never before. And, talking about how, neither of these candidates are people I would normally vote for, but I'm going to vote for one side or the other just because I feel like it's the lesser of two evils. The problem with that statement is that the system has created the situation where people tend to vote for the lesser of two evils instead of the one candidate that they think is going to be the one, the best choice. I mean, there was a big push for, a different candidate other than Biden, Bernie Sanders. It looked like he was getting close, but the Americans are very, very fearful of any type of left-leaning government, and he represents, the left. The media portrayed him as like a hardcore left communist socialist, but if you really look at the paper and the numbers, he doesn't want much different than what's happening in Canada. And traditionally, Canada has a lot of social reforms. But I've mentioned this before, the United States the two major parties are both right-wing. They're built on a capitalist right-leaning, manifesto. And they have a very long history of going to war against communism. And though there's a big difference between socialism and communism, that fear is strong, and it's very difficult to change anything. So, there's still a big chance that Trump will win again. Last time around, 4 years ago, people didn't think it would happen, and now they're not as they're much more cautious. We'll see how his COVID situation happens. Even specifically with the bias in the COVID, I mean, some news outlets are reporting the, discrepancies in what we're being told about Trump's situation currently with COVID. And other news outlets aren't touching that at all. They're just simply following the official narrative.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was reading a thing about, people were really getting mad because he went for a drive amid COVID diagnosis, and he went for a drive with, his bodyguards and, the driver, and it just, I don't remember the news outlet I was reading it from, but they were talking about how it was extremely irresponsible because it displays, a lack of care, and it seemed extremely negligent that he would be putting other people's lives at risk because although they were wearing masks, they still were in the seat beside him. And it was really interesting. And I saw that his doctor also did a few statements as well that he's not on oxygen right now, and people seem really interested in what's going on.
Well, of course they're interested. I mean, he's the president of the most powerful country in the world, and
But there's a lot of, even going into like the news articles, there's a lot of bias now.
of
Because
course,
everyone, despite anything, everyone has insane opinions on this, and there's really no neutral way to go about it. You either think he's some martyr or like some hero right now, or you think he's being dumb.
I mean,
Sure.
you can't be neutral about some things. Like, if you look at the facts, there sometimes you see a wrong or right. Just saying like, oh, both sides are wrong or both sides are like have their opinions. I don't think that's like neutral. That's also bias.
Oh, 100%. I agree with you on that.
well, and not just. I mean, even whose presentation was it? Ryan's. You mentioned about or was it even the first one today? There was a section of it talking about like what is non-biased stuff. Well, that's scientific fact, the math and everything. I tend to disagree with that because they don't. I mean, take philosophy. I don't know if you guys are taking the philosophy class. There's a whole section of that class, at least when I taught it, about philosophy versus science and what science gets wrong and how there is bias in science. And if I want to take a specific example, is the the doctor's statement on when he was actually diagnosed and why they did not disclose it. Or remember, like, I don't know if you guys followed it, the doctor officially said he was tested positive 72 hours ago when he made that statement, and people were quick to do the math, meaning that he was literally, that was like the morning after the debate or what have you, and or why did they rehearse? And then now there's kind of like backtracking, saying, oh, you must have misspoke. The doctor himself didn't say he misspoke, but people following the right-wing agenda are saying, quick to saying, oh, they that was just him misspoking. It must have been more than less than 72 hours ago, whatever. And you know what I mean? Like it's when we talk about science, there's still an interpretation of the science, and we're getting conflicting reports on science, especially on COVID. Every scientist in the world is dealing with it right now, all the doctors. And when this summer we saw all those doctors who said they don't wear masks and they don't do this and that. And then we see other doctors who are saying you have to wear a mask, it prevents everything. That's still science, right? And these people are legitimate, so there's always bias, even in science, even in math. There's, like 1984, the book talks about 2 + 2 is 5. When is 2 + 2 is 5? I used to talk about that in philosophy. Can it be 5? Of course it can. We won't go into that right now, but you can't blindly accept science, is what I'm saying.
Sir?
Yeah.
So about electoral college, yeah. Territories like Puerto Rico, they can vote in primary, but they can't, their vote doesn't count in the Congress. So, why do they even vote in the primary? What does that achieve if their vote's not going to count in the end?
Well, Puerto Rico is a protectorate, not a state. So they don't have the same rights as the other 50 states.
But, doesn't American, policies affect them? Then why wouldn't they be able to?
Of course they do, but again, they're not a state. They don't have the same rights given to them as a state would. They are just a protectorate. So, on paper they have these rights, but they don't have these rights. That's the long and short answer.
Is it kind of the same for territories in Canada too, or?
Not quite. It's just different representation, but not quite. No, they're still Canada. Puerto Ricans are Puerto Rican. It's a little more complicated than that. All right. Well, let's talk about some things that are on
Sure.
the
Sorry.
yeah.
I was just wondering, do you teach philosophy now? Like, are you one of the philosophy teachers?
No, I haven't taught philosophy in a couple years, and I wish I could, but I'm in the history department, so yeah. But
Oh, okay.
politics. One part of philosophy is political philosophy, right? So
Oh, definitely.
we didn't really touch upon that as much in my philosophy class, as there's a whole politics class, hence this class. But you know, um, it is what it is. But I always have stuff to say about that. Okay, so I posted a few things, but don't get overwhelmed because we're not going to go through every single one. Some of it's most of it's our websites and some 1 to 2 page documents for you to read. But let's take a look at. We've already gone there. We're going to look at so basically international agreements. So we'll come back to some of these, but and then in the nope. Oh, okay. So one of these things I just want you to kind of take a look at yourself. But some major international agreements, because we're going to talk about foreign policy and everything, are Kyoto Protocol on greenhouse gas emissions, the North American Free Trade Agreement, popularized as NAFTA. Of course, the Declaration of Human Rights, which is one of the oldest treaties or documents. The Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, and then, of course, the Ottawa Convention banning landmines. All of these are very, very important international documents, and all in the name of peace and the environment. Now, the hard thing about international documents like this is who polices who, right? So most of them are and often they are signed in good faith, but to keep up with them, I mean, we watched that documentary on the Declaration of Human Rights. Even Canada is not quite following it to the T. The greenhouse gas emissions issue, and many advocates are like, well, as long as they do the best they can. And other critics are like, well, no, this country is not following it to the T, etc. So, we're not going to get into these very, in fine detail just because of time. But, I want you to take a look at, what these things are, and their purposes. And I've added some websites that you can check out on your own. Now, I posted a little, so basically, keeping commitments. So like I just mentioned, we talk about, many countries sign them in good faith and do their best, but often or seldomly, whichever you look at it, they don't always maintain their commitment, or they try their best, what have you, right? Now, Canada, has always been has a history of being involved in international politics, especially things like NAFTA, obviously, because Canada is part of North America. And if you watch the news over the last year, especially between the United States and Canada with NAFTA, there's been a few incidences where Trump and Trudeau are definitely kind of, Trump says one thing and then Trudeau's like, no, he's not going to do that, blah, blah, blah. There's a difference between countries disagreeing and going to war and countries disagreeing and, being diplomatic with each other. And thank goodness Canada and America are very diplomatic with each other and won't go to war against each other because we'd lose, obviously. But I want you to think about these things. We'll come back to these once you've kind of taken a look. Nothing huge, just kind of your personal thoughts on those. Let's take a look. So here, sovereignty. So when we talk about sovereignty, we think of I don't know what you think of. What do you think of when you think of the word sovereignty?
Like a leader.
Okay, a sovereign, sure. Yeah, that's definitely something people think of.
It's like an ultimate power. Usually enforces such authority.
Okay. All right. What else? The power of state, authority, sure. So countries have fought long and hard to maintain their own sovereignty. All right. So if we talk about, Canada, or the United States, when we began our country, if you will, we were both part of the United Kingdom, right? The Americans had a war of independence against the United Kingdom and gained total independence. Canada, through treaty, etc., became, a part of the Commonwealth. Hence why we still have the Union Jack on many of our flags, and why we have the Queen on our money. But within Canada and within other countries around the world, and we're going to explore that today, there are pockets of, areas culturally, etc., geographically, that don't feel that they are represented or part of that country as a whole, and also want sovereignty, right? So Canada, we talk about Wexit, but we also talk about Quebec. And other countries, in Spain, they have the Basques. In the United Kingdom, we have Northern Ireland and etc. So, this is an ongoing thing. In where we live in Ontario, we have no mentality that we're going to separate from Canada. And one of the reasons for that is that it's the most populous and popular part of the country. And Ottawa, the capital's in Ontario. The the wealthiest and biggest city is in Ontario. So we kind of feel like we represent, or we are, Canada. But Canada's a massive country, not population wise, but geographically. And if you've ever traveled out to the West, like in British Columbia, they have a different mentality about things. I don't know if you guys have been out there, but you're learning how to drive right now. And to you in Ontario, a flashing green light means you can turn left, right? You know what it means in British Columbia?
What?
It just means it's a green light. Don't try turning left, you'll be hit, right? So even little things like that, it's a different world. I mean, it's 3,500, 4,000 kilometers away. That's almost as far as Europe is. And so, when we talk about sovereignty, there's issues of pride, decision-making, nationalism, and we'll take a look at these. So in Canada, I remember, if you remember in grade 10 civics, there was a whole, I am Canadian type of exercise, right? You watch that video of the guy saying, I am Canadian, the beer commercial. And you maybe had to do like a little collage or poster, or even like something along those lines. But, we often ask ourselves, what does it mean to be Canadian? What are the things that represent our country? How is Canada viewed around the world? And Canada is a strange one because of the fact that we are so multicultural. Ask yourself, or look at your own family in your life and see, were you born in Canada? Were your parents born in Canada? Were your grandparents born in Canada? And often you can't say yes to past your grandparents, if not you. And that is what Canada is. We're not physically in the class right now, but you can't look around at each other's faces. You will next week. And you'll see, like, we're all from somewhere else. That being said, in the United States, they have a similar, history of people coming from somewhere else. But we are the classic tossed salad, whereas the Americans are known as a melting point. We've come back. We've talked about what's next week. Next week, I think Friday is the first day you guys are in switching morning, afternoon.
Isn't it Thursday, the 8th?
I think, but don't quote me on it, because if I tell you the wrong thing, I'm going to get in trouble. But I think Thursday is the last day of this phase 1.
Quote
And
unquote.
Friday is the first day of phase 2. So Friday you will be here with me in the morning. I still don't have 100% confirmation on that. Okay.
Yeah.
So that being said, what? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to say I watched like this video of the naturalization in America, and it was like so different from Canadian. Like he was saying, "Oh, our history is your history. Our culture is your culture." It's like when you become an American citizen, like you just like have to forget about your
Well,
roots.
you don't forget about it,
No,
but
I know, but like
you're
I'm saying,
American.
yeah.
Yeah. But Canada, officially embraces multiculturalism. So, especially in the part of the country that we all live, the Greater Toronto Area, the GTA, there are people from every single country in the world who are citizens of Canada and live in this part of the country. And that's a beautiful thing. If you feel like eating at a restaurant from some random country, you could probably find a restaurant, somewhere in the GTA from that random country. And it's not to say that people are not proud to be Canadian, but they don't eliminate from where they come, right? And this often, critics say is a problem in some regards, and it's a positive thing in other regards. If we talk about cultures and those cultures that don't seem to gel with Canadian values, if there even is such a thing, which there are, because if we want to talk about laws, we can talk about values. Oppression of women. Canada is not too big on that, thankfully. But there are many cultures in the world that oppress their women, and they come to Canada and continue to live in a way that is more reminiscent of the country from which they came versus the country in which they live now. And many critics say that's not a positive thing. But again, Canada allows for you to keep your identity, right? So, we've already talked about symbolism is a very important thing. I mean, you talk about it in religion class, world religions, but politics is a very important thing too. We won't get into too much detail about everything, but we take a look at the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party and the colors used, etc. They all have something to say, right? Of course, the Queen and the crown and the history, right? The flags, the fleur-de-lis is very important, reminiscent of the French for Quebec, the cross, which is England's flag, the Union Jack, together with the others, etc. We have our multicolored money, which the Americans always make fun of us for saying that it's monopoly money. But ironically, if you've seen their money recently, they've started to add a touch of color, at least to the numbers. But that's we've always had colorful money, right? And other countries too. We have the CBC, which is a government-funded initiative. The beaver, the Canada Goose, maple syrup. I mean, all these things we take for granted, but these are the Canadian symbols, right? Of course, I remember someone asked, do they actually work like this, wearing this uniform? No, but it's it's a pomp and circumstance. It's the uniform when on parade. We talk about sports. Canada's real big into hockey. The summer sport officially, at least it once was, is lacrosse. Most people will only ever get a chance to play lacrosse in high school, if you even do. But many of the popular sports in the world, basketball is invented in Nova Scotia, hockey is huge, all very, very Canadian inventions. A Canadian invented the tractor, Superman, all these things, the zipper. We have things that we can be proud of, right? IMAX. I was gonna have you guys do a coat of arms, but I don't know. I think for In the, I don't know. I'll ask you. Do you guys want to design a coat of arms, or should we not? A personal one.
No.
Like based on our family?
No, anything. Your own. Nah. Yeah. Okay, I'll take it off. We can just talk about that then as a delete. That's more of like a grade 10 thing.
Yeah.
Boom, gone.
Just gonna say.
Think about what you would have put in there if you had a coat of arms, right? There's some examples of some kids that they did, maybe a little bit of whatever it means to be you, right? All right. Now, European Union. We're going to talk a little bit about that because, they came together. But in a way, we just saw Brexit and the United Kingdom is leaving. And so, it's a very important to understand it. So the European Union, the way to kind of generally understand it is very similar to the United States of America. The United States of America is more bound together as a country, but still 50 separate states, right? So we've talked about the federal laws, and the state laws and which supersede which before. But the European Union is very similar. They have one money, although many countries are not allowed to use the money yet until they achieve a certain economic level. But they're still part of the union. And so we'll get into that, So we have basically, in a nutshell, the member states, so the countries that are part of it, and countries that want to be a part of it that are still waiting to be allowed in, known as candidate countries.
Only Turkey is a candidate, or were they?
Pardon me?
Is it only Turkey, Croatia, and Macedonia?
Iceland, Norway, Belarus.
Oh, those are another color.
No, they're not part of the union, but yeah, you're right. Macedonia, Croatia, Turkey. Now, none like Hungary, etc., does not use the dollar yet. Switzerland will remain neutral as they have historically been, etc. Right? Now, of course, there's many other countries in Europe that are not part of the union, right? For one reason or another. And they have a government, but many people argue, it's not, they don't really have much power, etc. Right? So these are just comparisons of the how many people and how much money exists, right? So we can get through this. And they also have very multicolored bills. The euro is worth more than the Canadian country, and they're not specific to a country. Right? They have coins as well, of course. Now, nationalism. Nationalism, especially if you remember grade 10 history, is something that's very, it's a hot debate because there's a difference between patriotism and nationalism, right? Can anybody in a nutshell tell me what the difference between patriotism and nationalism is? Because often we kind of put them in the same category. Anyone? Yeah. Often people talk about, patriotism is being proud of the country in which you live, and nationalism is almost taking it to a level where, like, I'm better than you, right? In a very, very loose way. Well, in Canada, there's also a sense of, well, not just Canada, but nationalism is also a sense of, a closed off, my culture, my family versus yours. And there are many parts of the world that have, within a country, another nation, if you will, right? Quebec, I've already mentioned this before. If you ever traveled to Quebec, you listen to the radio and they're doing the news and they say in the nation's capital, it's 15 degrees or whatever. They're not talking about Ottawa. They're talking about Quebec City, right? And, we in the history, we had the FLQ and violence exist in Canada when we talked about the separation movement. But we have Wexit happening now, or at least not happening, but the ideas of Wexit. And the problem is that these through radicalization can become violent. So we saw it in Quebec, in East Timor and Indonesia, we've seen it. Kurdistan, Chechnya, lots of violence. In the Basque area of Spain, very, very violent history. Northern Ireland, extremely violent. Of course, Palestine and Israel, very violent as well. And this occurs when there's a very specific group of people that live under the rule of another group of people. And, the places where we see violence are the places where and thus we don't really see much violence. In Northern Ireland, well, that's a whole different thing, right? Or Chechnya and Basque, we've seen separatist movements through terrorism, etc. But they're fractured national geographies, right? They're different national identities that exist within a whole, and through history and teaching, etc. The idea continues to exist, right? No matter what the overall country will do, people still teach their children one way, and so the mentality continues, right? And then every time we see the word neo before anything, it's often a negative thing, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean a negative thing, but we do see the history of people seceding from or cultures and nations seceding from other countries and creating their own country, right? Right. So we're not going to go through these case border things, but talking about, borders and everything and national identity, we've talked about this many times in the class that borders are just made up, right? They can physically exist and follow a river or a wall that's created or a gate, but they're basically just political divisions. We even have borders within Canada. The border between Quebec and Ontario has been closely guarded in the last 7 months because of COVID. If you remember, one of the first things Ford was saying on one of his press conferences was, we love the rest of Canada, but don't come to our province. Stay home. And, on the news today, they were talking about Quebec is going to start up the spot checking, police checking on the highways, asking what are you doing on the highway kind of thing, because the cases of COVID are surging and each province is doing what they can to, stop the spread. So we have physical borders, right? Walls, gates, Trump and his wall. But then we have theoretical borders, literally just on paper, stories. And those are the types of borders that exist more often than, if you really look at a map, any straight line or what have you, that's been created by a person in this world to divide, right? Here's some examples of physical borders, which is still in China now, but once upon a time it was a border that was created physically, the Great Wall. Trump is very envious of the Great Wall, right? So real versus perceived, right? We talked about this often. They either do exist physically or theoretically, or a certain group of people feel like that it should exist, but doesn't. For instance, in Spain with the Basque region, there's no physical border saying this is the Basque region, but they want that to be there, and they create a world where that border is there. More borders. We talk about temporal borders, antecedent or superimposed. Antecedent borders are those placed down where no development has previously occurred, and then so basically, there's a plot of land, nothing's on it, a border's created. Superimposed borders is, if we took a look at what's happening in Israel and Palestine, where doesn't matter if there's a settlement or not, they've created borders there, cut right through people's homes, and causing a lot of protest. We won't get into that right now, but if you know anything or research about Palestine and Israel, it's unfortunately a lot of people have lost their lives because of superimposed borders. Border regions, the area around the borderline. Canada has a very long border region with the United States. In fact, there's some parts of the country that are not even guarded, right? It's the longest unguarded border in the world. I mean, how would they be able to guard it? Right? And then we have some really strange things where the border is not a straight line. So, for instance, there's a bank on the border between the Netherlands and Belgium where the border goes right through the middle of the bank. And when the Belgian officials come to the bank, they take all the documents and move it to one side of the bank. And then when the Dutch come, they go to the other side of the bank. It's just, and then it's strange. And of course, we have the embassies. Every country, not every country, but often countries have embassies in other countries. And when you set foot on the land of the embassy, you are technically in that country now. No longer in the country in which you are
Sir?
vacationing. Yeah.
Aren't there like 2 other countries inside South Africa?
Yeah, it's more complicated than that, but kind of. But there's a country inside Italy, the Vatican. We talk about the Vatican. So here's South Africa, right? So there answers your question.
What if you needed a passport to get into the Vatican?
Honestly, do you need a passport to get in the Vatican? I went to the Vatican when I was really young. I don't remember, but I would assume you do because it's its own country. But maybe not. But nowadays, everything's changed with, after 2011 and so forth and so on.
Oh, wow.
And there's pardon me, yeah.
When I'm Italian, so I'm in Italy a lot. But the last time I went to Rome, specifically, and visited the Vatican, I was young too. But maybe my parents had a passport, but I don't remember having to go through any kind of passport.
Yeah. Ask them. I don't know.
I should.
So in India, we have political enclaves like this, where there's a part that's not as Bangladesh and India, but together. It's very complicated that these things happen. And then, of course, there are disputes to the boundaries. I mentioned once the story between the Greenland, Denmark, and Canada on that one island up in the I can't remember what it's called, in the Arctic, where 6 months of the year there's a bottle of Canadian whiskey and a flag, and then they go, and then the Danish Coast Guard comes and puts their flag down, and that's obviously a friendly dispute. But there are obviously, international boundary disputes that exist and cause problems. There was a big Cyprus and this island here between Greece and Turkey, very, very disputed. Other disputed borders, Canada, United States, right? We have, there's some disputing happening between where exactly is the border. But again, for friendly, then it doesn't really matter, but other countries a little bit less friendly. So in Canada, there's a bar in Boulder, Colorado, and in, I think that's in Alberta somewhere, that literally goes in between the country. And this causes problems because one person might live on one side of the street in Canada and the others in the United States, and you can't even have to think hard about imagining what kind of problems that's going to cause. And right here, this is a big political enclave where the United States, part of this British Columbia is actually part of the United States, but it's only accessible by boat. And then, there's another part of Canada that has, right? So there are agencies that deal with the borders. There's a show on TV, I don't know if it's still on, but the Canadian Border Patrol or whatever, you guys ever seen it? Sometimes it's pretty funny. I saw a guy once coming from Australia and he had this toilet. And he's like literally on vacation and he was bringing home a whole toilet. So obviously he was red flagged. He was like just some young backpacker. And they're like, why do you have a toilet? It must be stuffed full of drugs. And he's like, no, I just saw it on sale and I'm bringing it home with me. And they're like, what? And then they put the whole thing through the x-ray and everything. And basically he was legit. They let him go. He was literally like on vacation, saw this nice toilet at a hardware store and he bought it. And he lugged it with him all the way home to Canada. Like some weird people out there, man. Anyway. So, Canada has the option of coming into union with the States. We don't want to, but we have the option. And that's a part of our long friendly history with each other. Many people don't quite realize that. But, we'll take a look at some pictures of Canada, some beautiful, I didn't take these pictures, but we talk about symbolism and national identity. Big part of Canada is the landscape and that guy, these people. One thing that's interesting about Canada is that a lot of people who live in Canada have never traveled within Canada. They've only traveled outside of Canada. And there are many factors for that. Money is one of the biggest ones. It's very expensive to fly to British Columbia. It's the same price, if not cheaper, to go to Europe. The Rockies, fishermen, British Columbia. And Canada's identity is forever changing. 100 years ago, 90% of Canada was of British descendant. Today, a small proportion is British and the larger proportion is from anywhere else. Right? So what does it mean to be Canadian? Well, the answer to that changes. Anyway, is there a bunch of pictures of Canada?
How come we don't have Bonhomme?
We don't
And-
have what?
Bonhomme.
Because it's a Quebec thing.
Yeah, but we had Bonhomme in elementary.
The
school.
what?
You know what? Why did you go to a
But
French
he's scary.
elementary
Why do you
school?
want him? Like, why?
Huh.
Why would you want that guy? He's so
Bonhomme
weird.
is
Wait,
the
what
best.
are
Part
you
of their
talking
culture.
about?
Don't judge them.
Bonhomme gives out hot chocolate with marshmallows. Bonhomme is not creepy. He is comforting.
He is creepy. He's giving out candy to kids. It's super weird, and I hate him.
It's a snowman.
He
It's also a dressed up teacher.
that
Bonhomme
makes
is
it worse.
beautiful.
That makes it so much worse.
Doesn't it make it worse? Oh my goodness! And then you have to all like guess who the teacher that's dressed up as Bonhomme is. I think people should bring Bonhomme back.
In
Well-
my middle school, everybody hated him and was scared of him. Like my
Okay.
French teacher had a puppet of him on her desk, and everybody hated him. She would put him on their desks if they were misbehaving.
But why does he have a nose? Why doesn't he have like
Exactly.
carrot?
He's so weird.
Because a carrot isn't functional, and
What?
his nose is cute. It's a button nose. It's like a little. It's like putting a little snowball onto a nose.
The
It's
laugh is creepy.
His laugh is beautiful. His laugh is amazing. Bonhomme is so
Horrible. It's
And
like
everyone- puppet.
He looks like a snowman Joker.
yeah,
Or it.
that's bad.
He is-
Nobody likes it.
Let it go.
You get free hot chocolate, and it's with marshmallows. He brings nothing but joy.
He's like
Santa's an
somebody's
old man.
sleep paralysis demon.
Well, let people be. That's.
I
that's
wish.
Okay.
You guys
Okay.
are really hating on a snowman.
Kids,
My
children,
demon
it's
looked
for
like
the
Bonhomme.
children. Think
What?
of the children. I remember I went to university before Australia at Carleton in Ottawa, and it was a big deal there too, even though it's a Quebec thing. But most people in Ottawa are from Quebec anyway. At least the people who work in the
My school was a
Government.
Catholic school.
yeah.
Like it wasn't. It's a feeder school for Robs. We still have Bonhomme. Bonhomme is amazing.
It is what it is. All right. Any questions? Anything? Is a big one. Okay, so I posted a couple. Obviously, a lot of these are just websites. Peruse them at your will. But I've posted a couple of readings. They're hidden in here. I mean, some of these, like this, was in the PDF I just showed you. But things like this, the Canada-U.S. border. Read that. What is nationalism? These things. Read them. And yeah, and the European Union document here. And then that's basically it. Anyone have any questions?
Wait, sir, so do we have any homework?
Just read those things.
Okay.
For the CPT, are we allowed only academic sources? Well, ideally, yes. I mean, they have to be legitimate sources. You know, if you're going to have to use Wikipedia, my suggestion is usually Wikipedia at the bottom is actually has a list of sources where they got the information from, which are typically legitimate sources. Correct, Tyler. Okay, so tomorrow we have Megan and C. Yeah, Wikipedia is really good as long as you read the footnotes. That's what I'm saying. So, you know, dive deeper, you know, into the topic. You find the thing you're thinking about in Wikipedia, go to the bottom and you'll find sources, and explore those sources. Tyler, this world is not about the fastest you can do something or the quickest you can do something. It can be the most efficient way to do something. But my point is, don't be sloppy. It's equally as effective and faster, as long as it is. Any questions?
What
Yeah.
format should our bibliography be for the presentation?
Say that again.
What format should the bibliography of the news report presentation be?
Oh, I don't know. MLA? I don't know. I didn't even think of that.
Okay, thank you.
I was also wondering for the presentations, did we have to submit them somewhere? Because I did not do that.
No.
I just kind of presented.
No. MLA is always good, going back to the other one, but no. No, all at once. Answer your question.
So, regarding our marks, when are we gonna get like updated marks?
Oh, by the end of this week, I'll update everything.
Okay.
There's been issues with everything. Honestly, you guys have no idea. Well, maybe you have idea, but
Have we been doing good? Well,
everyone's doing well. But yeah, if you haven't submitted something, submit it. But honestly, I'm definitely an easy marker. Plus, I'm even easier nowadays with all this craziness.
any 100 averages in this?
No, never. But did Ekaterina ever join the class? No? Okay. It is what it is. Okay, get to work. I'm going to take a 10-minute break and I'll be back in the classroom, but you guys don't have to stay on if you don't want to. But I'll be here. Cool?
Amazing. Have a great day.
Yeah, ciao.
Bye.